Sewing patterns have been around for a little over 100 years now, helping people create all kinds of things from curtains to Halloween costumes to even couture ball gowns. But if you're new to sewing, they can literally seem like a foreign language. But don't worry, I've been there and I'm going to help you with everything you need to know. Today, we're going to go over the history of sewing patterns, the anatomy of sewing patterns, and how to pick the best ones for your skill set. So let's dive in. Now, just a little background. Sewing patterns have been around for a little over 160 years, making home sewing easier and more accessible to people. Prior to that, most people either relied on hand sewing without any guides or dressmakers and tailors to create their own clothes. The first commercial sewing patterns appeared in the 1860s thanks to Ellen and William de Morris, who sold unprinted tissue patterns through their magazine, The Mirror of Fashion. And then in 1863, Ebenezer Butterick, that name might sound familiar, really changed the sewing pattern industry by introducing multi-size patterns, making it easier for sewers and sewists to get the right fit. And that's going to be the more traditional pattern layout that you're going to see today with our sewing patterns. Then in 1870, McCall's joined the market, later becoming the first pattern company to print markings directly onto the patterns in 1919. Then, of course, we have Vogue in 1899, and then Simplicity in 1927. And just throughout the 20th century, sewing patterns evolved with more detailed instructions, printed markings, and stylish illustrations. Today, we not only have paper patterns, but also PDF downloads and indie designers, expanding creative possibilities for sewists of all skill levels. So no matter what style you're aiming for with your sewing journey, there's going to be a sewing pattern out there for you. And today I have 3 different patterns here from different brands. One is a PDF pattern, just so that we can see the similarities and differences between all the different pattern layouts and instructions. So on to the anatomy of a sewing pattern. All right, now let's break down the sewing pattern, starting with the envelope itself. If you shop in the store or if you order off of simplicity.com, you're going to get your sewing pattern folded up in one of these envelopes. And this is honestly the best way to review and see, is this a pattern that I want to buy? So you're going to get the name of the brand as well as the pattern number in case you ever lose it or you want to recommend it to someone else. The size ranges, which is going to be very important because you don't want to buy a sewing pattern that's in a size range that you cannot fit. And for the sizes, you can typically find a chart on the back with your bust, waist, and hip measurements, and it'll tell you where you align on the size scale. So typically, sewing pattern size ranges vary by brand. So Simplicity has 6 through 14, and then 14 through 22, and then it moves into the plus sizes. And it's basically the same for McCall's and Simplicity. This is a PDF pattern that I bought from simplicity.com of this Butterick pattern, and the size ranges are exactly the same, but you're not going to find it on the cover because it's bought on the internet. It's going to be on the web page itself, which I'm going to put an overlay here to show you guys where to find this information. Okay, and so here you see we have the item number, which is that sewing number I showed you at the top, an image, the description, as well as the sewing rating, which this sewing pattern, even though it's 5 different items, it's rated as easy just because there's very few complicated skills you need to sew this one together. And if you scroll down, there's a tab titled Line Art, which shows you the line art drawing of all the sewing pieces in the pattern. And then if you click over to yardage, you're going to see the sizes as well as the fabric amount that you need to cut out for each size and the notions as well. And then of course, fabric recommendations. And so back to the sewing envelope in person, you again get a picture of the finished item, some line drawings in color on the front, and then on the back, some line drawings in black and white. And then you have your sewing rating. So this McCall pattern for this wrap dress is rated easy. And then this Simplicity pattern, which is the half button down dress, this one is rated average. And then of course, just like the online pattern, you're going to have the amount of recommended fabric you need based on your size, your notions, finished garment measurements, fabric recommendations, as well as the size chart, which for this McCall's, it's on the tab. For the Simplicity one, it's in the middle here, so that you can figure out what size you need. And so my biggest recommendations when shopping is one, make sure you're paying attention to the difficulty rating. I think my first sewing pattern was actually an average rated sewing pattern with facing and a hidden zipper and a keyhole. It was a lot. And those dresses are not worn to this day. And then also the sizes as well. Make sure you're getting your size so that you don't have to worry about grading or returning it after you've already cut the pattern. The next part of the sewing pattern is going to be the instruction sheet. Let's open this up. So when you open your sewing pattern envelope, you're going to get two things, the tissue sewing pattern and the instruction sheet. We're going to go over the instruction sheet first. It's a folded, printed sheet with all of the instructions and information that you need to successfully put together the sewing pattern. There we go. So again, we have another line drawing the individual pieces included in the sewing pattern. These are general directions that include your seam allowance, cutting, how to apply interfacing if the sewing pattern has interfacing, how to trim corners and curves, and any special notes that you need to know about the sewing pattern, as well as more complicated things such as lengthening and shortening, say the bust or the skirt or any other part of the sewing pattern that you need to get a better fit. The bottom is the cutting layouts, which is the recommended way that you cut your pieces out for the pattern based on the fabric length. So it's 45 inch, 60 inch. Those are the typical fabric lengths that you'll get your yards of fabric in, as well as interfacing cutout recommendations as well. And when you have sewing patterns that have multiple styles, they're going to show you multiple cutting layouts. So we have dress A, interfacing A, and then dress B. And interfacing B should be on the back side. Interfacing B and C, and then dress C. And then after that, it moves into the instructions, starting with 1, 2, and 3 for all 3 dresses. Typically for sewing patterns like this one, where all 3 of the variations are very similar, they're going to lump together the instructions that are the same. So this one says dress A, B, and C because these beginning steps are all the same no matter which dress you're making. And then it'll start to change as you get deeper into the pattern. So bodice A, because it's different. Bodice C and D, because they're the same still. Collar A, because it's different. Collar band C and B, or B and C, because they're the same. And the instructions just continue on to the back of the 4th page. And sometimes there's even 3 pages, depending on how complex the sewing pattern is. And so going back to the 1st page, one of the important things you want to notice that's pretty uniform across all sewing patterns are the symbols here and what they mean. The double arrow means grain line, which is important to make sure that you're cutting your pattern pieces either parallel or perpendicular to the selvage, which is the finished manufactured edge on the fabric that you get when you buy it from a store, like a craft store like Joann's or Hobby Lobby. And then a double arrow that's pointing in one direction means to cut the pattern piece on the fold of fabric. The dotted line represents the center front or center back of the garment, and it'll typically include the difference between the two, like it'll say center back or center front. Notches represent places that you want to match up. So the armhole of a dress pattern or top pattern will have corresponding notches with the sleeve piece so that you're placing it correctly when you're sewing it together. Dots can represent a variety of things, and I'll show you some examples, such as a slit on a dress, or where a button is supposed to be placed, or where a pocket is supposed to be placed. And then a solid black line is just a cutting line. And then a double, slightly thinner line is where you're going to lengthen and shorten. Pattern manufacturers do incorporate that into the sewing pattern, the best recommended places to lengthen or shorten a garment to maintain the look of the pattern itself. And then, like I said, below that, we have the seam allowance, which is 5/8 for this pattern. That's going to be typical for these mass manufactured sewing patterns. They allow for a larger seam allowance so that you have more room to make mistakes. And it's come in handy. I'm not going to lie. I've bought some indie sewing patterns that have a shorter or a smaller seam allowance, and it really requires you to be able to get it on the first try. And now I'm just going to show you the exact same thing on this printed PDF pattern. These are all the complicated pieces I had to tape together. And so it shows you a pattern layout of all the pattern pieces. These are very fine lines. You might not be able to see them. And the next page, again, similar to the folded instructions, you have the line drawings, your notions, which are the things you need, buttons, zipper, so on and so forth, the suggested fabrics, and then a line drawing and list of all the different pieces that are in this sewing pattern. Since this pattern has, the ability to make 5 different items, it has a lot more pattern pieces than the dress. And then we have our charts, which include the body measurement so that you can determine what size you should be cutting out for, and the recommended yardage for each size. And then just like for the folded pattern, we have here all the information on markings, how to cut your pattern, and best practices. And then finally, we get to the cutting layouts, which again are recommendations on the best way to cut out the pattern pieces to get the most out of your fabric. So we have a 45-inch recommendation for the top and a 60-inch recommendation for the top, and so on and so forth for dress B, dress C, and the skirt and pants. This is again a visual representation of the pattern markings. I'll probably put a bigger image of this on the screen just because this is really valuable and it gives you a lot of information that is really useful once you're putting things together. Darts is another one that's not in that dress, but it's very important to recognize these markings when you're putting a pattern together. This one has the fabric key, which for the sewing pattern is going to show a variety of colored variations of the fabric to show what you're supposed to be working on. So a solid darker color is the right side. A solid white color is the wrong side of the fabric, because some fabrics have right and wrong sides. A dotted graphic will be interfacing. And then if a pattern has lining, it'll correspond with colors for the regular fabric, but with lines in it. And then again, we have 5/8 seam allowances, information on how to do an east stitch, an edge stitch, a narrow hem, stay stitching, and other types of stitching that you might do in this sewing pattern. And then lastly, the rest of this very big stack are the instructions to sew and put together all of the items in this pattern itself. And that's the instructions. So now I can pull out the pattern pieces and show you guys what that looks like as well. Okay, onto the pattern pieces, and this might get a little messy. Your sewing pattern pieces come as this folded up tissue paper. It is very lightweight, so when you're unfolding it, you don't want to be too rough. And it typically is 2 to 3 sheets folded all together because there are so many pieces. There we go. Okay, let me put this to the side, and we'll just reference this piece for the sake of illustration. So this piece you see has the bodice front for dress size A, B, and C, or dress type A, B, and C. What you're going to find on these pieces are the name of the sewing pattern, the brand name, the name of the sewing pattern, the brand name as well, and then the pattern number. This goes back to our list of sewing pattern pieces here. And for each item, it tells you on the cutting layout what pieces you're going to need to be cutting out. So 1, 6, 8, 4, 9 to make dress A. And so piece 1 is the bodice front. Underneath, it'll tell you how many to cut out, which is cut out 2 of them. The sizes, again, my sewing pattern is sizes 6 through 14. And then this is a multi-size pattern. So all of the sizes in this range are going to be layered on top of each other on here. And so you see this line here along the neckline. There's 6, 8, 10, 12, and 14. And cutting it out, you would cut it out and follow along the line for your size. These are some circle markings here based on size, which is going to relate to where you attach your sleeve. Your sleeve will probably have a corresponding marking as well to match up. And then over here, we have a double triangle or a double notch, which is going to relate to where you place the corresponding piece for this as well, which is probably the other side of the front. And then we have another one here, number 12, is to collar for B and C. The instructions on this one is for B, if you're cutting out the dress style B, you're going to cut 2 on the fold. If you see here, we have our double pointed arrow, which is pointing towards this line here, and center back on fold. So what this means is you're going to fold your fabric, and on the edge that's folded, you're going to place this edge matching this edge, and then cut your pattern along the corresponding lines for your size. Again, we have 2 double notches, which are probably going to match up to where you attach this onto the back. We have notches here as well based on size for attaching as well. I'm going to show you what these look like cut out already. So I went ahead and grabbed this McCall's pattern that I used in the past to make a few dresses. Okay, and here we are. This one I cut out in a size 14. So it's already ready to go. These last a long time. I haven't had any issues with them deteriorating with use, but maybe I haven't been using them a long time. With this one being the bodice of a dress, you can see here the double line to lengthen and shorten. And I'll show you guys how they recommend that you do that. But this is where you're going to cut and add space, or cut and take away space to make the dress fit better to your body type. We have another center front cut on fold. So again, aligning this with the edge of a folded fabric, you would cut around the rest of the bodice of the dress. We have double notches where the front bodice will match up with the back bodice. We have these dots here to match up the sleeves to the sewing pattern of the bodice as well. And then here we have 2 different hem lengths, because this dress does come in 2 different lengths. You have A and B. I ended up cutting at the B line, but also I have the option of cutting at the A if I want to use a fabric marker to kind of bleed through onto the fabric and cut it out a little bit shorter. But this is how sewing patterns will illustrate any item that has multiple lengths. And it'll also include a hem recommendation as well. So it says hem at 5/8 of an inch, hem at 5/8 of an inch. And then the hem is also another great place to lengthen or shorten an item as well. Now I'm going to show you guys the pattern pieces from the PDF pattern. PDF patterns are really accessible because you don't have to go out and shop. It's very easy to find one that you love online, find some people who have made it before so you can see some inspiration photos. And they're easy to access because you can print them out at home. But they do require a lot of paper. I'm not going to lie to you. So with these, they're printed out. I have a normal printer, so they print out at 8.5 by 11. And so you print out however many pattern pieces it comes with. This one might have came with 50 pages, maybe, because it's a pretty big pattern. You get a dress, you get a top, you get pants, you get a skirt. And then you piece together the pages based on their recommendation. The pattern will show you how to place the 8.5 by 11 pages together to get the big cutting layout. So actually, this is actually what it would look like. So these are the 60, oh, it wasn't 50, it was 60 pages. This is a kind of large overview. This is kind of a large overview of how all 60 pages will piece together with, I think this is the facing, the pants, peplum, skirt, sleeves, the actual skirt. It'll just show you how all of it's supposed to be pieced together. And once you piece all the pages together, it's a lot of tape. It's 60 pages. Then you'll cut out the pattern pieces according to your size along the appropriate lines. So this dress pattern, even though it's a PDF, it still comes in size ranges. So this one came in 6 to 14 size, and I cut out a 14. And then here we have a marking, which is an X for the right side on dress A. This is the front facing for A, B, and C, which is dress A, dress B, and the peplum top. The sewing pattern number is 3. We have our double line showing where the best place to lengthen and shorten. You cut for the top A here, which is why it's significantly shorter. But I didn't make the top, I made the dress. And so the rest of it, again, showing another place to shorten and lengthen, and then all the way down to the hem for the dress facing. And it recommends a hem of 1 1/4 of an inch, cut here for B. And this is honestly how all of the pattern pieces are for the PDF pattern. These are a little more stabler just because I use a relatively heavyweight printer paper so that these last a little bit longer than maybe the tissue paper are. They're a little sturdier. We have markings for sleeve placement here. These are placements for buttons. And then we have the waistline here. Again, another place to shorten and lengthen based on the length of your waist. We have a bust dart here, illustrated by this triangle with 3 dots, 2 for the lines, 1 for the main corner, and you would trace this out according to your size. And that's all we have. These are the pattern pieces that you'll be interacting with, depending on the type of pattern you buy, and of course the brand. And that's the breakdown of the sewing pattern itself. Once you get the hang of all of these different elements and instructions, it becomes a lot easier for you to make your own custom creations, truly being able to make any kind of change that you want. So now let's put all this back up, and I'll go over some tips on how to choose the best pattern as a beginner. Okay, and now we're going to go over my personal best recommendations for picking a sewing pattern based on your skill set. I know this looks like a lot. It is a lot, I'm not going to lie to you. And this isn't even a quarter of all the sewing patterns that I own. So my recommendation for beginners starting off is to pick sewing patterns that have very simple silhouettes and very few sewing pieces. So I'll give you guys a story time. The very first sewing pattern I ever attempted to sew was this Vogue sewing pattern. And it says Vogue very easy. You know what? I just realized my error. It does not say Vogue very easy. It says Vogue easy options. Probably because it has the options for all these different beautiful sleeves. And so I picked this up thinking that it was going to be a very easy pattern. It was not. The bodice has 2 pieces. The back has 2 pieces and a giant keyhole in the back. The skirt comes in 6 different panels. There's an invisible zipper, not including the sleeves. Okay, no, this sewing pattern is marked as easy. And I guess on its surface, it is easy. all you need is a straight stitch, but you do need to know how to install a zipper. I did not know how to install a zipper. And so I ended up making 2 dresses with this pattern that I love. They're sitting here on my mannequin, and I completely messed up the zipper. I've tried ripping the zipper out and reinstalling it, and it was just a lot and a lot of pieces for my very first project. So that's why I'd say, even with some patterns that are marked as easy, depending on the level of beginner you are, I personally would recommend something with fewer amounts of pieces. Like this dress here. This is a knit pattern dress that I bought from a sewer off of Etsy. It's literally only 3 pieces. The front piece, and then the back panel comes in 2 pieces. And it's literally super cute. It's super comfy. And this, maybe because it's with knit, this took me maybe an hour to sew together. An hour to cut out the pattern, put it together. Of course, it's a PDF, so you got to do the whole taping process and then cut the fabric. But 2 hours, yeah, an hour to cut the fabric and everything, and then an hour to sew. And it was that easy. Another one is this simplicity pattern. I've actually made 2 of this dress. And if you don't make the waist tie, it's only a 6-piece sewing pattern. 1 for the sleeve, 1 for the other sleeve, 2 panels on the front, 2 panels on the back. And again, it's just straight stitching. This is a woven dress pattern, so it doesn't require anything fancy. No buttons, no zippers. Another one that I have here is this one. This one does not have, this one doesn't have anything. This is a looser fitting dress, and in my opinion, not that flattering. But I used it to make some comfy house dresses, and I've made a few variations to wear. But if you don't mind, or if this is your style, or you can see yourself wearing this type of dress is great to get started in and just get some practice in. Another easy one, this one has raglan sleeves. So this one I would say is an advanced beginner. If you want to try something more than just attaching a normal sleeve, you attach a raglan sleeve, or you can do a strapless like this, the model's wearing here. We have another version here with ties for the sleeves. That's honestly why I got this one, because it was kind of just a lot of fun options. They also show you how to add an elastic for the waist to accentuate your waist if you're interested. So this one I would mark as advanced beginner. You've learned, you've made a few things, and you want to start trying out some new techniques. And then here I have 2 more knit dress patterns that I've made. This one was my first after that Vogue pattern, and I've made a lot of this dress. A lot. The half sleeve is really cute. The waist tie that's sewn into the side seams is super cute. I honestly love this dress pattern, and I'll probably make more. This one from McCall's, this one's very cool because it has levels. McCall's has a beginner levels to help you learn new skills while sewing. This is level 1. So it's only front bodice, back bodice, sleeves. That's it. And if you do this version, then it only has front and back. Now this one does show you how to do a neckband. But think of, like this sweatshirt. It shows you how to cut and sew on a same fabric neckband so that you can have it, you don't have to worry about folding it at the top. And then it goes up to, I believe, level 3, where it shows you to start doing more complex things such as shirring a fabric, adding elastic, adding zippers, things like that. So that series from McCall's is a very good series to practice on. And then this is another really good advanced beginner pattern because it's still very simple. It's still very few pieces, but start to get a little more creativity to it. This is a knit pattern, so it has pockets. You have the option of adding a tie to the sleeve, and then you also have an A-line shape, more fitted bodice with darts, and then a more voluminous skirt as well. And so for beginners, I recommend overall avoid how adventurous you are, avoiding anything with zippers for the first few items that you make. Buttons can be kind of varies. I have a sewing machine that has a buttonhole stitch to it, so it's a one-step button stitch. I just put the sewing foot where I want the button to go, press the pedal, and it does everything for me. And I just have to cut a small slit. So that's pretty easy. But if you don't have that option, it can become kind of cumbersome to hand bound buttonholes. So that's something to think about. Zippers are another one. Zippers aren't that complex if you can understand the instructions around it. I still struggle to understand the instructions around it, but it's more difficult for concealed zippers versus just visible zippers. I've been able to do visible zippers on a wallet I've made, a dress I've made, but concealed zippers are a little more difficult, which again is why I have actually 3 dresses on top of my mannequin, my sewing dress form right now, that I need to rip the zipper out of and reinstall it correctly. So do with that what you will. As far as getting into more advanced projects, the world is your oyster. I personally made, so I do consider myself advanced at this point. I made a coat last year, and I ended up mixing fabrics. I did a lining, did a quilted cotton lining with a satin exterior as well. I've done a lot more fitted and tailored items as well. As you progress more and more, you can do more advanced things. But I recommend kind of taking it piecemeal. I'll be doing a more in-depth video on best practices on how to pick a pattern as a beginner and how to source patterns as well, because I bought a lot of patterns before I knew what I was buying and that I haven't even made anything out of yet. So with that, I thank you all for coming and watching this video. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions that I didn't answer in the video, please feel free to leave it in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and I'll see you guys next week for another video.